Welcome to Baseball and Coffee, episode 46 with Tino and Aaron. What's up, Aaron?
Not too much. We got a double header today, or what are they doing about this rain out?
Looks like they're moving it back a little. I wish it was a doubleheader. They're moving it back a little bit. It's going to change the pitching matchups a bit, but I don't know. Go Phils. As a Mariners fan, go
Yeah,
Phils, right?
yeah.
Big
Are
time.
they throwing? Are they gonna throw Ranger today then?
I
And
think so. I think so. This episode, we are going to dig in a little bit to relievers, relief pitching, some of kind of reevaluating our approach to 2022, and preliminarily speaking, what we might do in 23 with regards to drafting relief pitching and evaluating relief pitching. Any interesting coffee adventures in the last couple of weeks for you?
my coffee story today is more looking forward as it's November 1st than it is a look back. My Starbucks. I've been with Starbucks almost 20 years, and my favorite seasonal coffee that we offer is Thanksgiving Blend.
Mhm.
It comes out the first week of November, and it's probably also has the shortest shelf life of any of our seasonal coffees. So, and by that I just mean it's on the shelf for literally sometimes less than a week. And I really, really, really enjoy that coffee. So, November 1st, I always think about that coffee coming out, and I'll be getting as much of it as I can. So that I can enjoy it throughout the holidays. Usually at Christmas time, I'll still want my Thanksgiving blend and I'll have saved a bag for Christmas time
Mhm.
because I prefer it over the holiday coffees that we have. So that's what's on my mind coffee wise today on November
Awesome.
1st.
Awesome. Um, my coffee thought or coffee story is, I as a coffee person or someone who's worked in coffee in the past, you hear people talk about, I like this particular region or I like this particular farm. And for me, having worked for Starbucks, but also spent a lot of time in the third wave, I guess, coffee shop world, what I one of the big things that I thought I would always think about is the fact that you could take a bean and the way that Starbucks roasts that bean compared to the way that an independent shop might roast it or interpret it are completely different, right? Roast profile is completely on opposite ends. And so it's like taking a piece of bread and eating it without toasting it versus eating it um, on the verge of being burnt. And I'm not applying that to either one of the two sides of coffee. I'm just saying like that piece of toast is completely different um, on either end. Or really any food, right? You could take a raw carrot versus a cooked carrot. It's the same idea. What I'm getting to is I bought a bag of Guatemala El Injerto farm or Finca de El Injerto um, from the Walla Walla Roastery. And it's one of my absolute favorite coffees that I've ever had is when I had a coffee shop in South Seattle and Kuma Coffee had coffee from the El Injerto farm. There's brown sugar and tobacco and depth, and it was so interesting and so fun. I absolutely loved that coffee. I loved it as
Mm.
espresso. I loved it as an Americano. I loved it with milk. I felt like it stood up to milk. It was just a beautiful coffee. So I have some from the Walla Walla Roastery, and the roastery doesn't roast quite as light as Kuma did, but that same flavor profile still came through. I still got the brown sugar and the tobacco, and I just I think there is some truth to a coffee farm really having distinct characteristics, and
Mm.
in a certain range of roast you can pull those out. So I don't know, I was overjoyed by it. I was really happy to be able to have that same sort of experience again. Obviously I don't have the same methods of production at home as I do or as I did in a coffee shop, but the same experience of flavor and love I had with this particular coffee. So I was really thankful for that. It was super fun. Super fun.
That's neat. You'll
Uh,
have to text me how to spell that farm so I can look for it.
I will. It's EL space INJERTO. All right. So again, our theme for episode 46 is bullpen. Um, the first, I guess, topic that we're going to address is some areas of bullpen management success that each of us had in 2022. Do you want to get us started with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote down a couple things that I felt like I succeeded with this year. Um, First was maintaining ratios with still category impact. Was I feel like this impact both our TGFBI 15 team redraft as well as our keeper league as well. Um, Being able to get the counting categories on the relief side, whether it be saves or saves and holds, in our other league that we play in, being able to get those counting categories without giving up any ratio
Mhm.
slide for it.
So that's that's your area of bullpen management success, is being able to maintain ratios while still getting or garnering the counting stats, correct?
Yeah, and I feel like the key behind that is just really looking at the skills of the reliever,
Mhm.
and churning through, trying to not being. I
Right,
think a lot of it is just being willing to continue to dig and dig and dig. And I think when we get to things I could have done better, I'll hit this as well. But you start to get information, whether it's through pitching models, like Stuff Plus with that I use a lot, or look at early returns on strikeouts and walks, like we do our swinging strike rate,
right,
trying to see, we're in spring training looking at pitch mix changes, guys who are either increased their velocity or are adding a different shape or adding a new pitch
right,
and things like that. So trying to get that talent of that pitching talent first, and you're trying to mesh it with a role.
right.
So it's not always easy. And as we've talked about, sometimes if you have the bulk and you have a lot of innings, you can withstand a little bit of ratio hit
Mhm.
in the WHIP and ERA. When I say ratios, I'm talking WHIP and ERA. Anyway, I felt, as I looked back in the way I managed my relievers, I just felt like that was the area of strength. Was again getting this category impact without giving up anything on the ratio side.
Right. For me, what I have immediately is identify. So specifically, we have five relievers in our 16 team head to head. At least five spots where we can play relievers. We can also find SPRPs to take an SP role. What I have as successes are immediately is identifying uh, pitchers pretty early on in the season as big contributors. So I picked up Evan Phillips on June 4th. I claimed him on waivers. I picked him up. I ended up trading him to Loaded Bowlers on June 21st with a round 7 for Colin McHugh in a round 8. So I acquired a holds guy who was an SPRP. And then I was able to pick up Evan Phillips again after he had been cut on June 25th. So identifying Phillips in June, having him on my and I should say part of the identification was understanding that the Dodgers are great, right? And so you're going to have a ton of holds and saves available with anybody on that team. And B,
Right.
they really did help him reinvent himself, right? So his
Mm-hmm.
slider was an incredible pitch, and he ended the season with 19 holds, a 1.14 ERA, and a .76 WHIP with 77 strikeouts and 63 innings. So even outside of the holds, he was an incredibly effective pitcher. You and I were kind of, and I think we had some conversations about Evan Phillips, and I had identified him pretty early on. But I reaped the rewards of both claiming him in early June and picking him back up after he was cut. I have to say that cut was difficult because I dropped Brady Singer in order to claim Evan Phillips. And I understood that Singer was a different pitcher in 22 than he had been previously. But for me, it was worth it to get Phillips. And I think that I have more to say with him later on in the pod. But that was a huge deal for me, was getting him. David Robertson, I picked up on April 8th after his first appearance. So he picked up a save in his very first appearance. And I said to myself, I know the Cubs aren't going to save or have a ton of saves. Robertson has a track record. He's the kind of pitcher that a team like the Cubs could deal. You know, this hindsight can be 2020, but this is literally what I said to myself was if he creates value for himself over the course of the year as a good reliever, then they will trade him to a contender eventually. So there's value in Robertson being a closer in Chicago. So I kept him, claimed him after the first game, April 8th. He had 20 saves, 81 strikeouts in 63 and 2/3 innings, a 2.40 whip and a 1-1 or 2.40 ERA and 1.16 whip. The other one is Stephen Okert. I claimed on June 6th. The only reason I claimed him was because I cut Brooks Raley because I didn't like what Brooks Raley had to his involvement in the Tampa Bay Rays brouhaha with wearing the pride symbols and whatnot. Okert ended up with 19 holds, a 2.98 ERA, and 63 strikeouts and 51 in the third innings. Then the other kind of successes that I have down here is the pickup of Colin McHugh, because McHugh had 17 holds in the SPRP role, which we all know is basically free statistics if you can find those players. I gave up Phillips and a pick to get him, but I ended up again picking up Phillips again. And then the last one was you and I had a trade in the off season. I picked up David Bednar for a 10-round bump for you in the draft. Bednar was injured for like 3 weeks down the stretch, and that was really difficult, 3+ weeks, and that was difficult for me to withstand. But he did end up with 19 holds and 69 strikeouts. So for me, I think the successes were in watching arms and statistics really early on and being able to shape my bullpen in the first month or two of the season, as opposed to really drafting relievers or trading for relievers, whether it was in the off season or in season. And we can get to why that matters more as we talk more about bullpen. Why don't we take a quick break and we'll come back with areas for our bullpen management improvement and kind of what we're looking at in 2023. All right, Aaron, do you have anything to add to some of the successes in bullpen management last year?
I think the other thing that I really benefited from was targeting players who could impact multiple categories. You know, with the fluidity and the way bullpens are used, we have less teams that have defined closers.
Mm-hmm.
And while that can create frustration, it also, I think, creates opportunities. And so I was able to really only have one closer who was definitively the closer, and that was Jordan Romano. However, you know, I had other players who, when the game situation aligned, they might also get save opportunities, or they might pitch in a high leverage moment following the starter in the fifth or sixth inning with the game on the line and get a win.
Mm-hmm.
Or they might go an inning or two and get me 3 or 4 extra strikeouts. So, you know, guys like Karinchak, so if Class A have been used to his in a row, he might get a save. Or, you know, Whitlock was that multi-inning type weapon. Or another example here. So like in the playoffs, I had Cody Morris for the Guardians, who got me a win in the first week of the playoffs and got me 2 holds in the semifinals as he went to the bullpen. So just having pitchers who are going to have leverage opportunities, including saves, I felt like I was very competitive and really increased my. When I looked at what I did better last year versus prior years, I was more competitive in saves, and it wasn't because I was able to secure multiple lockdown closers, because I was able to get one as kind of the centerpiece of the category, And then
Mhm.
I was able to surround them with other pitchers who had opportunities, um, as the, depending on how the games unfolded. And I feel like that was a huge benefit, really benefited from that. And I think our CGFBI team was the same, with guys like Seawald and
Healthily.
players like that who may not always get the save,
Mhm.
but will be in line to get wins, saves, or holds. They're going to be in those. They're part of that winning formula on their team, and so they're going to benefit you somewhere.
Sure. That's a good point.
And I personally prefer that over just all or nothing save. You know,
Well, it's interesting. I think it's a good segue into. So I took our 16 team league, 16 team head to head, where saves and holds are each a category, and kind of broke it down into where I finished, what the first place team did, what the average was, what the mean was, and then who the top five finishers were in that category and where they finished over the course of the regular season. And what I found was, so I was 11th overall in saves with 54. The first place team had 90. Um, I also, I had an injury to Bednar. Robertson was kind of hit and miss. I got a few saves from other places. I didn't prioritize saves in the way that I think other teams do. Um, so again, I finished 11th. With 54, the average was 61, the mean was 62. But what I found most interesting was that, um, of the top five teams, uh, three of them made the playoffs. So Smurf, Balls Deep, and you, all three made the playoffs. And then the other two were the 14th and 15th place finishers, right? Um, my takeaway from saves as a cat, and I finished first in the regular season as far as um, wins and losses. My takeaway from this particular exercise was that while saves can help you get to where you want to go, obviously, I don't know that saves are a requirement in head to head to finish in the top and to win, right? Now, saves
right?
certainly help you in the playoffs, right? It's a little bit different in a playoff situation. I think you have to cover all categories come playoff time. But as far
Hmm.
as getting to the playoffs, I don't know that saves are a requirement to actually get there. I'm not advocating to punt as much as I'm saying I don't see that being the determinant as to whether someone made the playoffs or not. I
For
did
sure.
the same exercise with holds, where I finished sixth out of 16 with 80. First place was 93. The average was 71. The mean was 73. So I was above the mean, above the average. And with the top five in saves, we had the 11th place team, the 13th place team, the sixth place team, the ninth place team, and then you. And so two of those five made the playoffs. But interestingly, those two also were in the top five in saves. Um,
Hmm.
so again, to me, it speaks to the point of saves and holds can be a way, or it is one way to get to the playoffs. And I think it's a requirement to win in the playoffs, but it's not the only way to get there. And so I guess what I'm getting to is eventually, um, that investing huge resources in bullpen, whatever the format is, to me is um, not the method that I am going to choose to go moving forward. And I don't know if it's a winning formula to invest incredibly high resources in bullpen. Um, One of the other exercises I did is I took some of the top holds guys for each team and tried to figure out how they acquired those players, right? And so Beer is Good Food was first. He finished 11th overall. He did keep AJ Minter was a ninth round pick. Hector Neres was a fifth round pick. That's 59 holds between the two of them. And he picked up Alexis Diaz as an SPRP when I cut him. Huskies, who finished 13th, his top holds guy was Zach Jackson, who was claimed on April 26th, right? Smurf's top guy was Ciono Perez, who was claimed on July 8th. And then Lux Laster had Colin Poche and Andres Jimenez and John Brebbia and Carl Edwards. So he had more strength in numbers. Point being, none of these were really big resources that were invested in creating a top 5 holds team. What do you have to say about the idea that bullpen is maybe less important than we talk about, and that investing resources in bullpen is kind of fool's gold?
Well, I think that ties nicely into something I'm going to be looking at to try to do better at, an opportunity that I had this year. I used 25 of my 44 claims on relievers. So that's almost 65%, 65%. And as you stated and went through some of the teams that performed well in holds, a lot of them were pickups. And there is a certain amount of turn and burn. There's a certain amount of maybe you get someone and they get a job and you choose to capitalize on their value being high and you trade them and you have to go find someone else. I think that to your point, not investing keepers, maybe not investing early picks. We have not been advocates of doing that in a redraft. We didn't do that in our TGFBI team that did well. So that's not something that we believe in. But that means you got to turn around and do the work and pick up guys and find guys.
Right.
And so to me, I think that comes with it, but I felt like it cost me opportunities in other areas of my team. There was an overinvestment in that. And so that's an area that I'm going to go in and try to get that maybe under 50% and give myself more capital.
What was the percentage this year for you?
25 of 44. So over 60%.
See, I would actually argue that that's probably where I would want to sit, percentage wise, as far as my claims, in our league in particular. But in general, I think finding, because pitching is so volatile, and because specifically relief pitching is the most volatile, I would much rather invest keepers and high picks in offense and OPS, understanding that I'm going to have to supplement my pitching with, the majority of my waiver claims. I actually think that's a really good place to be, because if you look, like we said, the majority of these pitchers we're talking about that picked up saves and holds are players that were picked up off the wire. And so for me, my goal is actually to invest more in churning through relief pitchers through the waiver wire and less on younger players. So to pick younger players based on talent, sit on those players, understanding they're going to have peaks and valleys, and investing the majority of my waiver claims on relief pitchers instead. So a couple of areas for improvement that I found specifically with my team. So some of my bullet notes are that holds are easy to find, right? So leaning on, our ability to find effective pitchers, to find an effective pitcher before they start posting statistics, right? Finding the Evan Phillips of the world on the Dodgers and keeping them. I keep churning for holds. So if I have a guy, I like his stuff, he's not in a good role, Alex Vesia, someone like that, you cut him, you find the next guy, right? Because eventually you'll land on someone. And in our league, all you need is 5 relievers. Working harder or prioritizing even further, finding SPRPs, because it's such a huge advantage to have another pitcher in your everyday lineup. So now you have 6 pitchers instead of 5, or 7 instead of 5. And it's such a huge advantage when it comes to counting stats to have that extra slot. Another note is to not sacrifice for saves with closers who are going to hurt ratios. So tying into what you said in the beginning, I sacrificed a pretty high pick for Mark Melancon before the season started. And while Melancon picked up a bunch of saves this year, his ratios were so bad that it is almost not worth it. And so that idea that you can find cheap saves with a pitcher who isn't very good anymore is not a formula for me that I want to follow anymore. I also have that, like we said before, I'd rather throw a lot of picks and claims against the wall to find good relievers than invest other resources. And that, if you have, so two more things. One is if you have the ability to, or the ability and the time, I should say, to follow advanced metrics and velocity and movement and effectiveness of pitches in, um, in spring training or in the first couple of weeks of the season, that you have an incredible advantage when building a bullpen. I think that goes without saying, but utilizing that ability and investing that time up front can really, really help down the road. And that's something that I plan to invest even more time in, watching relievers over the first month or so of the season. And the last one for me is I kept Blake Trinan on the IR. I kept thinking, here's this 30-hold guy who's going to come back. When he did come back, he was super effective. He was the Dodgers setup guy. We all know that. Uh, so while track record matters, I kept him way too long. I could have traded him for picks or assets at really any point in time in the season, and I didn't. And my lesson from Trinan is that while track record does matter to a certain extent, there's so many relievers out there that it's not worth holding on to if you can get something for it. That relievers are very much fungible outside of the couple of closers that you can count on over the course of the season. Do you have anything to add to bullpen improvement?
My last comment was just I'll be actively looking to try to stay away from. Ironically, we've talked about the Dodgers a lot, but I think you mentioned Evan Phillips. He was, to my opinion, outside of them using Kermel in the ninth before they took that job from him, he was really the only pitcher in that bullpen that had a defined role. Mm-hmm. Everything else was completely flexible. And they also do a great job of maximizing their talent and tweaking guys' arsenals. And so I got pulled in by that and really didn't get much categorical impact. And I kept investing in their bullpen of multiple pitchers and just wasn't getting anything. I think there are other maybe less successful teams. The Reds might be an example of that, although Diaz started to show some things. But David Bell has shown that he's not going to be consistent with who he uses where. The Cubs do that. The Cubs do that quite a bit. So while I've believe in and I've talked a lot about embracing the flexibility and way bullpens are used and looking for advantages in that, after this year and this lesson, I'm going to be more active and trying to stay away from teams where there is a certain amount of randomness, because I think as a fantasy owner, there's nothing more debilitating than when you see a team that you have a bullpen and you see them have a 1 or 2 run lead, and you know that you have a guy who's in their leverage ladder and he doesn't get to pitch and he hasn't pitched in 2 days, and you're like, well, why? But these guys, they are tracking their health, they're tracking their bounce back recovery. Sure. They may have a plan for the following day of the order they're going to use them. So, there not a lot of teams, but there are teams, and I think the Dodgers have proven to be one of them. Again, outside of Evan Phillips and Kimbrel this year, you just didn't know when they were going to use their pitchers, and I was hurt by that on a couple occasions. So I'll be adjusting for that.
So the next question on our itinerary or outline for today is, which closers would you target in round 2 or 3 in 2023? And I think we're going based on TGFBI, like 15-team league. But I'll start the conversation with, that is the question on the outline. But my question to you is, like, why the hell invest in bullpen at all?
Right. No, I think that's
so you look at. I just look at like Jason Adam. Like I look at Jason Adam, I look at Brooks Raley, I look at JP Fireeisen, I look at Evan Phillips and Alex Vesia and Brusdar Graterol, and I'm like, Yancy Almonte. Like, you've got all these great pitchers in these organizations who all have great movement, great velocity, are great pitchers in their own right, and the role is just all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, with regards to our particular league, there's no relationship between finishing high in holds and saves and actually winning, right? Actually making the playoffs. It was out of the top 5 teams in saves and in holds, 5 of the 10 teams made the playoffs. So it's like a hit and miss thing. I don't know. The more research I did, the more passionate I got about the idea that just go fucking find a bunch of bullpen guys. Go find them. Invest your resources elsewhere and just go find them and be smarter than the next guy. And if you happen
Yeah.
to not be smarter, then so be it. But to invest, we had a point in time in TGFBI last year, and a lot of the conversation where you saw relievers, you saw Hader and Hendricks going as high as the bottom of the first round, or teams taking them at the 1-2 on the turn. Like, why would you ever do that? I have a bunch of numbers to support this, but that's my first reaction to the conversation about what closers to target rounds 2 and 3. My notes say, in a nutshell, none. Not interested. Much more
Yeah.
interested in securing OPS and securing balanced players that get me some steals or an A.
Yeah.
What say you?
I know I know I can't disagree with anything there. And like I said, we practice what we preach there. I think um in my idea with the question was given that that's our position, if someone hypothetically had said, okay, you you have to use a third round pick on a closer or you don't get the pick. We're
Right,
going to take it away from you. I
right.
thought it would be a fun discussion to have of if we were in that position, us individually, which of those relievers would we target? Which of them? What would be our strategy behind who we would pick, and why for you? So my answer would be Emmanuel Clase.
Uh-huh.
Right now there are in the early ADPs there are 6 pitchers who have an ADP around of less than 60. Presley is right on the cut at 61.
Mm-hmm.
Going in reverse order, Hendricks 52, Hader 48, Romano 46, Class A 35, and Diaz 32.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but Class A would be my choice, and my reason behind that is a couple things. First, the command, his walk rate is exceptionally low. Secondly, his age. I don't feel that there's a drop off potentially looming or any team change, so there's stability there.
Sure.
His ground ball lean may lead to some years where his whip might balloon. However, his swinging strike rate is really, really good, despite the fact that he doesn't get a ton of strikeouts.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that he comes out, he throws strikes, keeps the ball on the ground. And yes, there may be a few days where they leak through, but I love that situation. And to me, again, if someone said, you have to invest this pick or I'm taking it from you, I would want that. To me, he feels like not only supremely talented, but there's a lot more stability there. And whereas I would run the other way, like on Diaz, who's going to be a free agent, and we've seen it before. He's spiked these amazing seasons, and he comes back the next year and he can't find the strike zone. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I would run the other way on that one. So that's my thought. If again, if the pick was going to be taken from me, I would choose Class A, and those are the reasons why.
Mm-hmm.
But we can leave it at that. I think you stated your point very well, and I'm with you. This was
So
just merely an exercise.
I did a ton of random research, and what I found was, so I took, okay, a couple things. So I wanted to know how many relievers each year had more than 10 saves and how many relievers each year had more than 30 saves. And in 22, there were 30. So the trends that I found was that the number of relievers with 10 saves or more has gone down each year for the most part. So in 18, there were 43 relievers who had 10 saves. In 19, there were 37. We're skipping 20 because of COVID. In 21, there were 39, so a little dip up. And then in 22, there were only 35. So it's gone down it's gone from 43 relievers with 10 saves or more in 18 to 35 in 22. I also tracked how many relievers had 30 saves or more, and it was 11 in 18, 11 in 19, 10 in 21, and 10 in 22. So basically, you can count on there being 10 relievers with 30 saves or more each year, but finding that bottom depth is reducing a little bit. The more interesting thing that I found, so I tracked mean, average, highest. The 57 save season of Diaz in 18 is a complete outlier because the high in each of the other years is 41 in 19 by Kirby Yates, 39 in 21 by Melanson, and then 42 last year by Clase. The big learning for me was, so of the top 10 in 22, only 4 of them were in the top 10 in 21. So those were, did I write? I didn't put those down. And then of the top 10 in 21, 5 of them were in the top 10 in 19. And then of the top 10 in 19, only 3 of them were in the top 10 in 18. So what that says to me is that there is not a ton of predictability in who the next top 10 are going to be in, with 30 saves or more in 2023, right? There, you
Yeah.
think that you look at the list and you assume that rankings mean that that's what's going to happen. And the reality is there has not been a year, and I didn't go past 18, but there has not been a year since 2018 where more than 5 of those closers have repeated as a top 10 or a 30 save or more closer.
Yeah.
Why are we
So spin the
investing picks in
chamber.
that?
Yeah.
Right? Why are we investing picks? And then some of the names that you look at, like in 21, of the top 10, you've got Melanson and Jansen and Kyle or in and Liam Hendricks. Those all make sense to me, right? Melanson kind of, but he had a great role. But then you've got Will Smith, Josh Hader, Rysel Iglesias, Edwin Diaz. Okay, all of those you make case for. Jake McGee, right? Aroldis Chapman, who at that time made sense, and Alex Reyes, right? You look at 19, it's Kirby Yates, Roberto Osuna. I almost said Al Osuna. Roberto Osuna, who's out of baseball. Chapman, Hader, Will Smith, Brad Hand, Rysel Iglesias, Jansen, Taylor Rogers, who came back to haunt us this year, and freaking Alex Colomé, right? In 18, you've got Diaz with 57, but then Wade Davis, who's out of baseball, Craig Kimbrell, Blake Trinan, who's a setup guy now, Jansen, Felipe Vasquez, right? Vasquez is in jail. Chapman, Hand, Brad Boxberger, Shane Green. So these are all guys that you're like, what the heck's going on, right? I don't get why we spend so many resources and we spend so much time trying to build a bullpen with like a reliable bullpen. And the reality is I don't know that we know what a reliable bullpen actually is. I don't know that we can build it with any sort of certainty. And it's just it's crazy to me. It's super crazy to me that we invest resources in a bullpen given its lack of predictability. With that, let's take a quick break. We'll come back, finish up some of these bullpen thoughts, and then talk about, of course, some of the targets that we might have in the bullpen in 2023.
I don't have a
So, a couple more things about targeting closers and kind of whether it's smart or not. So, of the top 10 closers, I have down here Clase or from last year, Clase, Hendricks, Presley, Jansen, Hader, Edwin Diaz, Romano, Daniel Bard, Gregory Soto, and Rogers. Only so 5 of those seem like locks, right? Clase, Hendricks. I call Presley a lock. I know his health was kind of up in the air, but the Astros are going to win 100 games. Jansen and Hader. We knew those were closers, right? Of those, Hader put up saves but had a 5+ ERA. Now, a lot of that was luck. His xFIP was lower, but he still produced a 5 ERA. And then Hendricks also was not what we thought he was going to be. So I would say 3 of those 5 produced what you thought they were, but we considered all 5 of them locks. And you saw all of them go in the top 3 rounds in drafts. Of the next tier that were good bets. I have Edwin Diaz and Jordan Romano as good bets. They weren't locks, but they were guys that we thought were good investments. And then I think both of us would have called, or you tell me, would you have called Daniel Bard, Gregory Soto, or Rogers bad bets to be top 10 saves guys in 2022?
I think convention would say no. I think I would have said yes to that for two of the three of those.
Got it. Who would you have said was you could count on a little bit more?
Taylor Rogers.
Okay, so and then of I have a list of players that I felt like were really highly valued coming into 22 as relievers. Camilo Doval, the Barlow twins. I know they're not twins, but I call them the Barlow twins. Craig Kimbrell, Paul Sewald, David Bednar, Raisel Iglesias, Giovanni Gallegos, and Corey Knebel. Interestingly, so Knebel, right, is going to close for the Phillies. We're excited about him. We know there's health risk, but he did, his draft stock did tend to go up quite a bit. He only had 12 saves, right? Joe Barlow had 13 saves. There was huge debate about where to pick Gallegos, and a lot of people valued him as a close to a top tier closer. At minimum, he was kind of like that second tier closer on a really good team. He had 14 saves, right? Raisel Iglesias, we saw go in the third round, and he was considered a top 4 closer. He had 17 saves last year. And then you had people like Daniel Bard had 34. Jorge Lopez had 23. David Robertson had 20. Clay Holmes had 20. Tanner Scott had 20. I guess what I'm getting at is you just don't know, right? You can identify talent. You can identify strikeout pitchers, swing and miss pitchers. You can even identify teams that you think are going to win a ton. But in my opinion, this idea that you're going to invest, say, a top 60 pick, right, which is the top 4 rounds in TGFBI, or even a top 75 pick in a closer, for me, is fool's gold. I won't do it, especially after this research and seeing how volatile it is and how difficult it is to identify a closer that's actually going to be able to stick in that role and be healthy. No way. I need OPS, and I'll rely on the research and the time and the effort to go find the next guy who's going to be a great closer. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think it's well said.
I appreciate that. Again, Shane Green was a top 10 closer as far as saves in 2018. Do with that what you may. All right. Relievers, with all that said, saying that relievers don't matter, just go find them, do your research, get the next pop-up guy, don't invest resources. Who are your relievers to target in 2023? Be it incredible stuff, or maybe incredible stuff coupled with a little bit less notoriety and the potential for taking over a role that we may not think is ready to be filled yet. Who are some of your favorite relievers to target?
Yeah, so I have two guys who are free agents. And then I have one kind of off the deep end on a bad team, but where I think there may be opportunity, whose stats kind of popped in a way I don't completely understand. So the first player I want to highlight is Chris Martin. He is a free agent. He was a Dodger for the second half of the year. I believe he was acquired from the Cubs. The Dodgers, as they wanted to do, got him to use his best pitch, or what they viewed as his best pitch, more, and that was his cutter. His cutter percentage went from 18 to 31%. His fastball percentage remained steady. He became a really dominant right-hand force for them in the second half. His K minus BB percent was 38% in the second half. Gave up basically nothing, threw a ton of strikes, and Roberts would use him. I remember a couple of times using him against Manny Machado with people on base, and he would be brought in for that part of the lineup on occasion. However, I think given the way he performed, given his arsenal mix, he's not going to forget everything that the Dodgers taught him, even if he doesn't stay there. he potentially could be at the back end of a bullpen next year. One of the things I would question with him is, the Dodgers really took care of him. Can he stay healthy? Can he throw on back-to-back days? However, I think the strikeout and walk skills and the arsenal change and his performance in the second half have my attention, knowing that he's a free agent.
Mhm.
Any thoughts before I go to my next guy?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Spot on.
So the next guy I wanted to highlight is Robert Suarez. So he has a option. So he can opt out of his contract and be a free agent, or he can opt in and stay in San Diego.
Mhm.
So one of the things I've been burned by in the past personally is getting too hyped up about guys I've seen in the postseason. So I think that's something to be wary of. And my own learning is because you have to remember these guys are amped up. They're throwing at max effort. So their stuff may play up a little bit more. However, his second half stats portray what we saw in the postseason for the Padres as well. He was admittedly, by his own admission, pretty nervous his first couple appearances. I really drove his ratios early on. If you look at his second half stats, his K minus BB was 24.7%. His swinging strike rate, let me pull that up, was 13.9%. And he almost has a starter's arsenal as a reliever.
Mhm.
He's a strike thrower. Once he got more comfortable in his role, he threw more strikes. His walk rate went down. And you see him pitch, his size, extension. To me, he's 31 years old. I think given this year of experience, he could explode, whether he stays put or gets another opportunity. So he is someone I'll be interested in.
How much will him staying in San Diego versus opting out impact your desire to roster him?
I think without knowing where he's going to be, it's hard to say. I mean, his situation could get better or worse. It's just hard to know.
Mhm.
I mean, if I owned him in a keeper or dynasty, I would guess I would want him to stay because he's on a winning formula now.
Mhm.
And so it's more of a known. But it's clear that Melvin trusts him. And I've come to respect the Padres pitching coach quite a bit. I think he gets the most out of the talent that they have
Yep.
there.
I agree.
The last guy I have off the deep end is a Detroit Tiger. So you mentioned Soto as someone who had a lot of saves this year, despite I think having a 2-11 record.
Mhm.
Alex Lang is someone who popped on when I did a search for second half performers.
Mhm.
However, what's interesting, and this is something where, and you've mentioned this, and I think even says this, sometimes the model just missed something. So let me pull up his stuff plus here. Where did I think when I lost my power, I lost my spreadsheet. Oh, there it is. So Alex Lang, right-handed reliever, throws a curveball the most of all his pitches. His pitching plus is only 94.7, which is suboptimal, and his location is 91.3. However, stuff plus is 108.1, which is good for a starter, but typically not representative of someone who has frontline reliever type talent.
Mhm.
However, when I looked at his swinging strike rate,
Mhm.
it's astronomical. He's getting a ton of swing and misses. Now he still has walk issues. However, when you're getting that much swing and miss, you can dance around the raindrops to a certain amount, to a certain degree.
Mhm.
You look at his savant page, he's featuring again the curveball almost 50% of the time, which is really honestly fascinating to me. Sinker second most, and then a changeup 20% of the time. So really a 3-pitch mix, curveball leading the way. Walk rate's the biggest opportunity. Again, the whiff rate is what has my attention. Because to me, if you have swing and miss and you're at the back end, you're in the mix for saves. The ability to get swing and misses, I think, something that major league teams look for. It's documented. They look for swing and miss.
Mhm.
That's the easiest way to get out of an inning is to strike people out. So that his ability to get swing and miss has my attention, despite the fact that the model doesn't quite capture that, and knowing that he does have potential command problems. But he's someone that kind of a deep end player that popped based on his swing strike rate and swing and miss that I'll be watching.
So I have a bunch of questions because of the Alex Lang idea. So first one is obviously doesn't fit the model, but has tremendous swing and miss. What is my first reaction to that is I wonder how much deception he has in his delivery. So this is 100% the time where I will pull up video of a player to understand what's going on because the numbers don't jive,
Mm-hmm.
they don't mix, right? The story isn't, the narrative is not complete with numbers, with a player
Mm-hmm.
like this. I need to know. So what I did was I pulled his Savant page. His, as you said, he threw his curveball 48.8% of the time. Um, his statistics on the curveball were incredible. He didn't have tremendous spin on it. It was 85.5 miles an hour, 2,186 RPMs, 6.4 feet of extension. Like nothing pops there. But his freaking whiff percent on the curveball was 57.8%. Okay. Which is nuts, right? Part of how we discovered Dylan Cease was finding a pitcher with 40+% whiff rates on pitches and a lack of control. His changeup is 89.7, right? It's about 5 or 6 miles an hour different than his fastball and sinker. The changeup has very little spin, which is what you want with the changeup, so it sinks. 82.9 miles an hour, 6.5 feet of extension, but 56% whiff percentage. So he's got two pitches with 56% or higher whiff percentage. And those are two of his three primary pitchers. And the other one is not meant to get strikeouts, which is the sinker. So I will put Alex Lang at the very top of my list of pitchers that I need to go see. I need to understand what's going on with him, right? Now, context-wise, he's pitching in Detroit, which is a great pitcher's park, but he also is pitching for a team that may not win a ton. So take that with a grain of salt. But if you're looking for skills, I think that's an incredible find. Just for context sake, his curveball in 21 got a 48% whiff rate, and his changeup, while he only threw 97 of them, had a 46.2% whiff rate. So it's not as if this is coming out of nowhere, right? These whiff rates are real, and I think it's very much a pitcher to target. I do wonder curveball changeup mix. Is that going to be incredibly effective in this day and age? I don't know the answer to that, but I love the
Well,
find.
it's interesting. It looks like he did. You were looking at his arsenal. I was following along as you were going over the whiff rates. He ditched his four seam.
He did.
He got rid of that, which had a 60.9% hard hit rate in 21, and he got rid of it to go with the two seam.
Right.
Which only had 35.9% hard hit rate. So he's on a two seam fastball.
He went from throwing so he threw, where is it here? He threw the four seam 45.2% of the time in 2021. He only threw it 3.3% of the time in 22. So he, in essence, he increased his fastball by almost 10%. He increased his changeup by about 5%. He reduced his four seam fastball by 42%, and he increased his sinker. Really, he didn't even throw a sinker in 21, and he threw it 28.5% of the time in 22. The last thing to add is, so I wanted to see if there was crazy movement on the curveball because, where the hell are you getting this 57% whiff rate from? And it's -4% to average vertical movement and -91% to average with horizontal movement. So he's 6.3 inches less than the average curveball in as far as horizontal movement goes. I have to go see what he's doing. I have to watch it. I just, none of this computes. But I think it's an example of, finding a diamond in the rough, especially in a bullpen where their closer is not particularly effective, and their closer is also left-handed, which is not preferable. I love it. This is the kind of shit that makes me like super, super, super excited. Actually, so before I give my relievers, I should share, and this was my open forum question or comment, but I'm going to share it now. It took me about a month to get back to a place where I was ready to really embrace these stats and embrace the grind and the time and the energy after losing in the playoffs, after the Mariners going down, after seeing the Astros make the World Series, like all the different things that really got to me. I didn't know that it would take me a month, but it took me a month. And this prepping for this episode and digging into relievers, I appreciate you suggesting relievers because it was kind of a safe place for me to dig back in. But the love is back. I got really excited about this episode, and I don't know. I thought I would share the fact that it took about a month to kind of recover and get back to a place where I was ready to dig back into content. Um,
I empathize, and I'm glad you're back.
awesome. So I've got a couple relievers to share. First one is pretty obvious, but it's Devin Williams. He might be my number one reliever overall going into the year next year. I think he's probably going to be the closer now that Hader's gone. From a number standpoint, he's pretty much the best reliever outside of Edwin Diaz and last year, but he has consistency and longevity behind him. He's been this effective for years now. The next one is Hector Neris. He's 33. I believe Ryan Presley is a free agent. And given Neris's history as a closer, he's been durable over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. His K minus BB is 23.5%, so 30% K rate, 6.5% walk rate, which is way down from his days in Philly. And his velocity has been steady over the last couple of years. So what I see is a very predictable 30% strikeout guy who's learned how to walk fewer batters by going to the Astros and will be pitching in the back end of a bullpen of a team that's going to probably win 100 games. So you can kind of put Rafael Montero in that same bucket. He's 32 years old, very consistent reliever, high strikeout. I believe that role would go to Neris if Presley is indeed a free agent this year. But Montero is one to keep an eye on, especially if you're in a holds league. Another one is Andres Munoz. He's 24, is pitching out of the Mariners bullpen. Obviously throws like 102 miles an hour, 93 mile an hour slider, 38.7% K rate this year and a 6% walk rate. So that's a 32.7% K minus BB. Can't ignore that. I think Seawald showed a little bit of weakness over the course of this year that we didn't see in 21. Doesn't mean Seawald's not going to continue to get 20 saves. But if the Mariners decide to ever go a little bit more conventional in the back end, I could see Munoz taking that role. He's the natural guy to take that role. Evan Phillips, as we talked about, 33% K rate, 6.4% walk rate. Dodgers bullpen, I think they like to have someone who's going to be their primary closer. They've shown that with Jansen and Kimbrel sucks. So if they believe in putting someone in that role, I think Phillips is the natural person, the natural pitcher to be in that role. Obviously 100 to 110 win team. You want that closer. Then the last one is super interesting to me is the aforementioned Alexis Diaz. He's 26. I did have a 12.9% walk rate and a 32.5% K rate. I do think that the fact that his brother is a dominant closer actually helps him ever so slightly in terms of the way that people see his future role. Walk rate was bad, but he did have a 31.1% whiff rate on the four seam fastball, which is pretty high for a fastball. And he had almost 2,700 RPM spin rate on the fastball, which is pretty high. It means that he's really getting that fastball to look like it's rising. 7.5 feet of extension, which is elite. Then he had a 45% whiff rate on his slider and a 16.3% swinging strike rate overall. And then lastly, he had a minus 11 run value on the four seam and a minus 7 run value on the slider. And as we know, a reliever can be incredibly successful with two dominant pitches. It's kind of what you look for. And I think that team is on the ascent. They've got a tremendous minor league system. They've got a lot of talent coming up. I think they have some decent big league talent currently. I think Diaz is the natural heir apparent in that bullpen to take over, and it would not shock me one bit if he was at the bottom end of that top 10 that is 30 plus more saves or more in 2023. So that's the one guy out of all of them, the one guy that I think is going to be less expensive from a draft position standpoint that I would look to pick up is Alexis Diaz. Any thoughts on any of those guys? Any guys out of those that you really love?
I was
Besides,
looking at second half swinging strike rate leaders. You mentioned Munoz. He was number 2 behind Diaz.
Mhm.
Lang interesting was number 3.
Nice. I love it. I love it.
Uh,
But I would say
and
too,
then the
like,
other thing was interesting. I was just looking at Montero's pitch mix, and then I have one other thought. It was curious to me that, not curious. I think it's compelling that Montero, his 2 most certain pitches are both fastballs, a 4-seam and a 2-seam, and then a changeup. I think that's a really interesting mix. To have 2 fastballs as your 2. I kind of love it, honestly. I don't see that very much. And then my last thought was, I think what's hard, and this applies not to my targets as well as yours, in general, when you go from being this leverage arm in the 6th, 7th, 8th to being the closer, we just don't know how much these front offices and these analytics departments are hand selecting these pockets of when to use these guys. I was thinking about Houston, and like they're at the forefront of all of that research. And what did they do different with Montero besides his arsenal and the physical characteristics of its usage? When are they using him? They have no left-handers in their bullpens, but they have certain guys they know their pitch shapes match up well against certain left-handed pitchers. And so the teams that are really advanced like that, so you take that pitcher, even if he retains the pitch and the arsenal shapes that he has, put it in a new team, and you put him in the 9th inning where it's your face whoever comes up.
right.
It's sometimes you just don't know. You don't know. We can try to apply those skills, but it's kind of unknowable how guys will do.
Right.
So
Well, I think that's part of what, I like Neris and Montero because, Neris is a fastball, forkball guy, right? Or split finger. And split finger has always been effective from a righty against a lefty. And so he's got pitches to be able to face both. And I believe the splits reflect that. Montero, obviously, the same way, where, if you've got a fastball coming at you and you don't know if it's going to go up or it's going to dive, and then the changeup follows the same path as the 2-seam, I assume, to a certain extent, but it's going 10 miles an hour slower, right? And so those are much more effective for me against left-handers coming out of a right-hander than maybe the fastball slider combination is. Unless you are Andres Munoz, whose slider is so fast and moves so much that it's just kind of impossible to hit regardless of what side you're on. But I think your point is well taken, and it's hard to predict who's going to be a closer because we don't know what front offices value, how they think, what they think about matchups, all of those sorts of things, I think are really, really important. All we can do is look at what that regime has done in previous years. But even then,
right.
sometimes research pushes them in a different direction.
Right.
No,
for sure.
But I do think that all of this conversation, so the research about what's happened over the last 4 years or so, talking about an Alex Lang or an Andres Munoz or an Alexis Diaz, it all just kind of goes to say that bullpen is important, right? Like bullpen can certainly, obviously in Roto, it is incredibly important. But if someone tells you that they can predict that their bullpen is great coming out of the draft, they're full of shit because they don't really know, right? They just don't know.
That's true.
It's not predictable in the same way that some of the, you look at some of the ace starters, some of the top starting pitchers, unless barring injury, most of them are going to be great, right? Barring injury, DeGrom is going to be great. Barring injury, Scherzer is going to be great. Barring injury, Verlander is going to be great, right? You just know that. And it's not the case with relievers. It doesn't work that way. Raisel Iglesias was healthy this year, and he got traded to the freaking Braves. If Scherzer gets traded, he's still a starter, right?
Right.
Iglesias gets traded, and all of a sudden, if you're not in a holds league, he doesn't matter anymore. So I caution using any sort of like real resources on bullpen before the season starts. And while that was my inclination heading into this exercise, I appreciate doing the research for an episode like this, because it really does support that idea. And it gives me confidence going into building a team for 23 that this is the right way to go. Do you have any counterpoint to that at all? Is there any reason for people to invest in bullpen before the season starts?
I mean, you have to invest, but you got to do so selectively, and you got to look at it, to me, as like the draft is just the beginning. Is there are trade-offs no matter what you do. And I think, for us that play keeper, that's part of it as well, speaking transparently, like I roster Romano, and you look at the way he's valued in redraft, and like, well, the math should say he's a keeper, but as you highlighted in your year-to-year turnover, there's a better than 50% chance he doesn't have 30 saves next year.
Right.
Just based on the math and whether they bring someone in to take his job, or he gets hurt, or, whatever the case may be. Or they sign a free agent bat and they're winning all their games, by 6 runs, you just don't know. So I think it goes both into redraft and how do you invest your resources there, but also for those of us that are making keeper decisions, trying to figure out how to value these guys year over year, and what what is it that you're getting when you're holding on to them into next season.
Right. It's I love, from a fan standpoint, I love the idea of a lockdown bullpen. I remember the days. I remember the Nasty Boys, right? Norm Charlton, Rob Dibble, Randy Myers. I remember John Wetland and Mariano Rivera, or Francisco Rodriguez and Troy Percival. Like, there are these really cool marketing kind of groups of relievers that were dominant and fun, but realistically, the way to win fantasy is not to build a great bullpen through the draft or,
Right.
or through keeping them. It's by doing the hard work. I think, honestly, that's requires the most work and the most effort of any aspect during the fantasy season is building a great bullpen. I really think that's what moving forward will take the most mind share for me, is building that bullpen.
Yeah, 100%. And I think for me, it's one of the more enjoyable parts too. I think I joked the last time we recorded of how it takes me most of the season, but by the end, I'm always like, I want to keep this group for another year.
Totally.
Because so much work and thought is put into like trying to get the right mix and the right roles and the right talent, and
Right.
but you finally get it there, and then the season's over.
Right. Right. I appreciate this episode. This was fun. Like I said, it kind of rekindled that fire after being a little bit salty about some of the results at the end of the year. I appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate you.
Enjoy the
Good to
World
talk.
Series. We'll talk next
Right.
week.
Yes, indeed. Bye.
All right.